Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Go Blue with Stu podcast. I'm your host, Stuart Douglas. Today with me, I have Mike DeCourcy, who how does one man watch and follow so many sports?
DVR is a good handy tool for that. I can tell you that. True.
So you still have cable, because I can't do it with my, I'm disconnected from cable. I can't even watch too many games, honestly. So I need that DVR in my life. It's important.
Yeah, I could not live without that. There's no way. It's too important because of the need to move times around to fit my schedule. You know, like, I don't know how the other writers do it who follow nationally, but a night like Wednesday night, when you've got maybe 7, 8 essential games being played and all fairly much in the same window. I don't know how you watch them all. So I DVR everything, and I can go faster, and I can, I have a real hard time watching games I know what happened in, unless I'm looking for something specific for a research project or for a Big Ten Network studio appearance or something like that. But to just sit down and watch a game I know who won, I really have trouble with that.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I have utilized the extended highlights. It's been a new thing, I think, in the past few years. I love the extended highlights. That gives me a full picture. And especially when I was overseas, it was like the only thing I could watch. So I was religious with those. But yeah, DVR is very important. I want to talk to you, obviously, about Michigan basketball. And I was looking up, Googling Mike DeCourcy talks Michigan, or Mike DeCourcy Big Ten predictions and stuff like that. And I came across one, and just like everybody else, you predicted that, you wouldn't be surprised. You said you wouldn't be surprised if Michigan finishes a champion, but that they would have some challenge. And I'll give you credit there that they would have some challenges, and they might even have to establish a new formula. Is this completely surprising to you? Their record and their start, and just how they performed lately?
I have been asked a lot about the nature of their season in the context of disappointment. And some of my colleagues in the national media immediately grabbed onto the, quote, most disappointing label. And I never thought it was fair. I had them ranked, although I still had them in the top 15, I had them ranked lower than pretty much anybody. I had them as the third Big Ten team. I had no doubt that they would be on that tier, or I felt like I had no doubt. But what's gone wrong relative to them being on that tier? I think it starts with the assumption that a lot of us made, and it was an unfair assumption, that because Mike Smith came in from Columbia and was an immediate smash, was a terrific Big Ten point guard from day one, that automatically every transfer up that comes into Michigan's program is going to be a Mike Smith level success. Devontae Jones, it hasn't worked for him. And not every player who transfers up, it immediately or eventually becomes a huge success. It works for some. Carlik Jones at Louisville a year ago worked out really well for him. He had a terrific year, although the team faded late. And he did not play as well in the second half of the year either. But he obviously mastered the early part of the season and was very successful. And we've seen that again at Michigan, where Mike was so good. But it hasn't really clicked for Devontae. And I don't think that they could. One thing that I don't think this Michigan team could afford, based on the number of players who went out, they couldn't afford anybody to really miss, to be great. And so Devontae, and then secondarily, Caleb Houston, who was a top 10 recruit and who has struggled in a lot of games, especially early in high-end games. Pretty much every time Michigan played a high major opponent, he would struggle and Michigan would lose. And I don't think that was a coincidence. A lot was expected of him. A lot of times players take a little while to adjust. I mean, Peyton Watson at UCLA, brought in as a top 10 recruit, still believed to be a lottery pick, but hasn't been highly productive. And, I don't know about Caleb's specific circumstance, how he spent last year, but Watson's a good example, and this may or may not apply to Caleb, of a player who had essentially no senior year in high school. High school, but senior season in high school, essentially none. And that and no one had spring EYBL, Peach Jam, Adidas or all Under Armour, if that was your scene. Nobody had any of that. And so that had been something that had helped a lot of players make the transition. I'm playing every game against high major talent. Yep. Maybe not against high major coaching, but against high major talent. So it hasn't clicked for Caleb. And early on, Eli Brooks was able to make up for some of what the other players weren't providing, but it's not really, 20 points a game is not Eli Brooks's natural habitat. I mean, right. That's not who he is. And that doesn't mean he's not a terrific college basketball player and someone that anybody in America would want on their team.
Yeah,
he's great. He just isn't a superstar. So that's kind of what happened to Michigan from my perspective. And I think that the fact that it happened early, eventually, as people start picking at it, well, how come you're not better? And when I say people, I just don't mean random people on Twitter. I'm talking about, my colleagues and me and all the people who discuss these things. It makes it harder. It's another obstacle for the team to overcome. People expected more. It hasn't been delivered. That disappointment becomes another burden.
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of people have asked me, are you surprised? And they want me to say yes. And I said, well, I'm never super surprised when teenagers don't perform well, especially in their first year. Like, these are kids. And for you to be, I mean, I guess you can be maybe a little disappointed. I wouldn't use that word, but it is not surprising when you have so many moving pieces. You lose so many great players. And I'm just trying to get Michigan fans, any college fan, to wrap their head around that. Like, every year is a new year. Every kid is different. Like, you cannot predict these things whatsoever. But it's been fun to watch the growth. And I think along with that, the growth of Coach Howard, and sort of how you mentioned, maybe they need to establish a new formula. And they did. They've been running different sorts of sets. They started out the set with a screen for Hunter against Maryland to start the game off with a bucket. And, you can't just have Franz or Isaiah Livers or Mike Smith enter it and, just free flowing like they did last year. So it has been fun to watch. I don't know if you picked up on any of that or what you've seen from Juwan as the season has gone on in terms of, kind of X's and O's standpoint.
I like the fact that he has been willing to be flexible. I also like the fact that he has not been dispirited. Yeah. He has been very steady, and I'm not surprised by that. But that doesn't mean that one can't, a coach can't come and get frustrated and allow that to be, again, another obstacle. And that's not what he's done. I think the one thing I would say that needs to happen, and that this very well could be happening, but one thing that needs to happen is, if you look back to 2020, then they were still transitioning, obviously, to a new coach. And they had the roster that they had, and Isaiah got hurt. And when Isaiah was healthy, they were unbelievable. And when Isaiah was hurt, they really struggled. And that was kind of a defining thing for them that year. And then last year, Isaiah was pretty much there the whole time, give or take, and they were great. And so I think, that leadership and character that he provided, that needs to be built into the program. It can't be that player dependent in a sense. And I think that's something that, if you had Isaiah on this team, a lot of what happened in the first month, 2 months would have been different because of the steadiness and the stature that he had. And I think that you need to recruit somebody like that. And, I'm not sure exactly how one goes about that in today's day and age, because if you recruit a really talented player, then he may leave you quickly. And if you recruit a not talented enough player, he may not help you much. Mm-hmm. And so finding that sort of player or players, I think that that's something that would really be important for Michigan. And whether those players are on this roster, maybe in time, some of the freshmen are, another Eli. I think, again, Eli would, could be that kind of player. Yeah. But I don't think he's quite able to overcome, the performance deficiencies, I should say, of some of the, the more prominent players on the team. So I think that's something that in whether it happens within this season or it happens in the next recruiting cycle, I think that's something that could really benefit Michigan as a program.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of saw Livers kind of develop into that, and you see that a lot of times with guys that progress each year. And one thing that is underappreciated is steadiness, and like that steadiness does progress and grow for each player. I can see Caleb kind of being that. I know Michigan fans are not excited about maybe the way he's shooting the ball and the expectations that were put on him, but I think they're excited that maybe he'll return now and get that player back and watch that growth. It is interesting to watch these freshmen play and learn on the go, and like just make one less mistake each game. And they just started out the season with a bunch, so when you make one less, it's going to slowly get better, but that might not translate into wins. What do you see from this freshman class? And let's say Caleb does come back, Musa comes back, next year they're not going to even have any seniors. As far as I think, I looked at the roster, there's not a single junior on there, and whether they get another grad transfer or not. But what are you seeing from this freshman class that can translate into success next year?
Oh, I watched Caleb play in the U19 World Championships, and so I know what he's capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think adjusting to playing against high-level college defense night after night, some guys are so talented that it doesn't seem that that it's that much of an adjustment. But even with those players, I mean, with the exception of the absolute ridiculous players like Durant when he was at Texas,
Mm-hmm.
even the best of those players. I mean, we saw Paolo Banchero go down to Duke a couple nights ago and not take a shot for like a dozen minutes while his team is slowly dipping or rapidly dipping, and that made a difference in them not winning the game. And he's too good to not take a shot. But he couldn't see the shots because he was being defended really well. And so that's something that is an adjustment for pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
And so for Caleb to be struggling with that adjustment is, the level to which he struggled was kind of a shock, but that he's struggling at all is not. And usually what ends up happening with a player as talented as he is, that gets conquered. And then all of a sudden, you have a terrific player on your hands. And I think that's absolutely going to happen with him if he sticks around. And I'm a believer that if you can't conquer college defense, then your conquering of the NBA is going to be really difficult to attain. And I've always believed that if you're not going to make an impact at all, and you're going to spend most of your time in the G League, that you're better off playing the second college season. PJ Washington being a good example of that. Mm-hmm. Play the second college season, become a truly great college player, get valued in the draft, and then go into the league ready to play, ready to make a difference. And I think Caleb is more talented than PJ was. And so I think that his second season could be even more significant.
Yeah, he has the advantage of not having to capitalize on some talent. He has the height, he has the ability, he has the shooting ability. It is all there, and he'll grow into his body a little more. So it is all there for him to come back and have success next year, which is exciting, very exciting. What do you see from this Michigan team and the Big Ten as a whole? Can they crack that upper half, sort of the middle, but let's say upper half? Can they crack the upper half of the Big Ten?
Okay, so right where they are now, they're 2-3. So
yeah,
numerically, it's not out of the question. I mean, they haven't played a huge segment of their schedule.
Yeah, so they have 13 games left, 6 versus ranked teams. So yeah, it's not an easy road.
No, it's not. And one of the interesting things about this season is that teams like Penn State that would not fit into that upper echelon, that didn't, somewhat like Michigan, although not a little bit more expected than the Wolverines, didn't perform great in non-conference, but now they're in the league and performing much better. Rutgers we thought that they would be better than they are, but they're fighting for every inch of the court. We saw that in the Iowa game, held Iowa below 50 points. That's not easy to do when one guy averages practically that on his own, but they did it. And so none of those games is going to be easy. I'd say the closest you'd come is home Nebraska in a couple of weeks. But even they, having won no league games, have been in most or all of their league games. There have been a few that were one-sided, and even took Ohio State, which is a championship contender in the league, to overtime. So you have to be ready for that. I mean, if you're the Wolverines, I mean, you really have to be all ready and not taking anything for granted against the teams that come in that are, less accomplished. Northwestern, Nebraska, you get them at home. You got to be ready to fight when you go to Penn State. And then, can you be successful against the teams in the league that have been winning games? I hesitate to say yes, because I haven't seen this Wolverines team do it yet. They haven't beaten a significant opponent from the beginning of the year. So but I won't say that they can't do it, because I know how much talent is there. I know Hunter's, he was an All-American for us last year, second team All-American. We talked about how talented Caleb is and how much I love Eli's spirit and his fight. So they can beat everybody on their schedule. At Wisconsin, that's going to be a rough one. They don't beat themselves very much, but again, if every Wolverine came out and had an A game, then that'd be a tough night that tough afternoon, I should say, for the Badgers. So I can't say where it's going, but I can say where it could go, which is that they have the ability and the schedule to finish in the upper half of the league. But yet they have to find that Maryland performance that they delivered. That has to be a more regular occurrence.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Where do you rank Big Ten for Power 5 conferences?
I'd say, I think the Big 12 is clearly the best. Right now, they have 9 teams that are eligible for the NCAA tournament, and all 9 could make it. They won't all make it, but each of the 9 could make it. That's pretty astonishing. I've never seen anything quite like that before. Probably the closest was the ACC early 90s, and then Big Ten in Big East in 91, when I was covering Pitt then. They had, I believe the league was 9 teams then, and 8 on Selection Sunday still had a chance to get in, and 7 made it out of 9. So that's kind of what this year's Big 12 is looking at. From there, whether the Big Ten is stronger or the SEC is stronger, I think the top of the SEC is probably stronger. But the bottom teams, the middle and bottom teams, I think are a little bit less consistent. And so I would probably side with the Big Ten there. The Big East and Big Ten went head to head in the Gavitt games, and the Big East came out firmly on top of that. I think there's less pure talent in the Big East, but again, they fight you hard. There's kind of a lot of Rutgers teams, maybe slightly more talented Rutgers teams in the Big East. They fight you for every inch of the court. Mm-hmm. I still think the Big Ten has better players than the Big East overall, which is why I'd give them a slight edge. So I'd say probably Big 12 1 easy, then Big 10, and then SEC and Big East tied for third.
Gotcha. I don't know, and I can't even really guess, but it seems like this year in the Big Ten, in terms of individual scoring, has been some of the highest maybe I've seen in a while. Am I wrong?
It's wild. It really is. I can't remember. Maybe we have to go back to Sean Respert. I can't remember having guys that at the top of the league that are also at the top of the country. Keegan Murray, Johnny Davis, those guys that being that high ranked in scoring. Usually, if you look at the leading national scorers, the vast majority of them are playing in mid and low major leagues. That doesn't mean they're not great players, because a lot of them are. Right. But it's hard to consistently score in the 20s in a high major league. Luka Garza did it, but that was partly because Luka could, as a post player who was elite as a post player and who also had a 3-point shot, he could score inside, outside. For wing players like Keegan Murray and Johnny Davis to be doing that in this conference is pretty remarkable.
Do you think Keegan can win Player of the Year, even if, Iowa doesn't make the tournament or finishes in the middle of the pack?
I think it'd be hard, in part because Johnny Davis is playing so well.
Yeah.
And his team is not right now and doesn't seem to be ticketed for the middle of the pack. It seems to be, headed for for contention for the conference championship. So, I think right now, if you asked who is the Big Ten's leading candidate for All-America Player of the Year, it would have to be Johnny Davis.
Makes sense. Can my guy Hunter still make a first team? It needs a late push, huh?
Yeah, he does. And not so much because of what he's done. Remember, a lot of this goes into team success. That plays a big role. Impact is huge. Yeah. But also because the league, as we said, is just loaded with great players. I've never seen anything quite like it. I mean, you go back to the early 90s when you had 4-year guys. And so then you had Jimmy Jackson and you had Chris Webber. It was a 2-year guy, and Jawan and Jalen. And there was an unbelievable amount of individual talent in the league then. But having these sorts of seasons is really uncommon. And I mean, really, you could select a first team All-America just of Big Ten players and have players left over. Trace Jackson Davis, E.J. Liddell, the players we've mentioned, Hunter. It's just amazing. Jaden Ivey, another. And if you prefer a different Purdue player, Zach Edey, because of what he's able to do with his size and skill. I've never seen individual talent in terms of seasons, having individual players having these kinds of seasons since I've been covering college basketball, and that goes back to late 80s.
Yeah, EJ Liddell, I think, is an afterthought for some people for whatever reason. In terms of like Player of the Year, I don't know, maybe it's just not a sexy name. Doesn't really make too much sense. But in KenPom, I think he's like number 2 for Player of the Year for the nation or something. It's just like insane to me. So do you think, because, I don't know if it's a stereotype or just what I've experienced, you guys get into the tournament from the Big Ten, teams get into the tournament from the Big Ten, and there's just kind of a difference of play or maybe talent where these Big Ten teams were ranked a little too high because they were beating up on each other, but it seems like there is the talent there to carry these teams through the tournament. I mean, they've been having a lot of success throughout the past few years, but what teams, like, how deep do you think they can go? Like, can MSU make a run? Do you think, OSU can make a run in the tournament? Like, there's that much talent in the Big Ten?
Well, yeah, I think those teams could. I think that they certainly have that ability. And Wisconsin is a team that both has that ability in Johnny Davis, a guy who can take over a game, went to Purdue and put 37. With a lot of that going against Jaden Ivey, who is the single most dynamic player in college basketball. So shows what he's capable of when it's needed. But I think the thing that I look at is what should happen to an extent. I mean, who should make a run? And I start that conversation with Purdue and Illinois. Purdue, obviously, with the talent and depth they have, the size, no one can match. They're a little bit lean at point guard. They have 2 very fine college players in Eric Hunter and Isaiah Thompson, but neither is a true setup playmaker, which is why they've spent a lot of their time running their offense through Jaden Ivey, because he can get deep on anybody because of his dynamism. He can get the ball to the rim against any team in the country. I mean, I looked at that Illinois double OT game on Martin Luther King Day, and I thought he was playing terribly. And ultimately he was 3 of 11 from the field, but I mean, couldn't get anything to go down. And then you look at the end of the game and he shot, I think, 15 free throws, and the numbers are great, and they win the game. And so it just shows how really capable he is of making things happen for them. So they've got a lot going for them. And then Illinois, a team that found a real rhythm during the absence of Andre Curbelo and beat a lot of people. And then Andre comes back on Monday and they fall. I don't think those two circumstances are connected. They were playing a great team. Kofi got in foul trouble. It didn't really have anything to do with Andre coming back, that they weren't as successful. But I do think that there's an adjustment period to a player who's as uncommon as Andre is.
Yeah.
Again, a player who is as creative as we have in the conference and maybe there is in the country. And so going from a guy like Trent Frazier, who handled the ball, got it where it needed to go, made good entry passes to Kofi Cockburn, made a lot of deep shots under pressure, to a guy like Curbelo, who can get the ball to the lane almost at will, who can set up teammates, who can get to his own shot. It's a different setup. And so how do they manage that adjustment period? Do they lose games in the time because they're adjusting? And how great can they be once Curbelo is completely integrated? I think they can be special. I like the group around their central players. I think that Alfonso Plummer's been a great addition, and I think that they have the ability to be the deepest running team in the tournament of all the Big Ten teams.
Yeah, it's a luxury to be in an adjustment period and still be playing so well. It must be nice. Michigan fans are probably a little jealous of that. You talked about Jaden Ivey, and I have a diehard Purdue fan. My friends are diehard Purdue fans or diehard IU fans. And so, a lot of hype around Purdue. And I said, you know what, Joe, it's just going to be the same thing for Purdue. They're going to go in a tournament and Jaden Ivey's going to go 3 for 15. They're going to lose. And then he proves that he can do 3 for 11, still have a massive impact in the game. So I'm kind of reevaluating my thoughts on Purdue as a whole. But right now we are recording tonight and IU and Purdue have not played yet. This will come out on Friday, but I wanted to get some of your thoughts on IU and Purdue and how you see that matchup. Now the line started 2.5 points for Purdue, or in favor of Purdue yesterday. It's up to 3.5 now. But I got a lot of people here saying they're taking IU money line, and I think they're crazy. What do you think?
Well, my question is how effective can Trace Jackson Davis be against Zach Edey, who he'll face a good portion of the game? A year ago, Trace really struggled against Miles Johnson. Miles, 6'11", great length at Rutgers. He really struggled when he faced him. Couldn't get much done at all. He's a different player now. He can move. He can get shots from not from deep, but from the perimeter, from the foul line. He's a much better player in that aspect. But he also has to deal with that overwhelming physicality of Edey and what he's capable of. So Rutgers has won 9 in a row in the series, and they're the better team. But I will say this: that when Assembly Hall is right, it's one of the best home court advantages in college basketball. And with IU on the roll that they're on, and with Purdue on that streak, and IU fans dying to end it, I will not be at all surprised if they make that such a difficult home court that it's hard for Purdue to prevail. That's my caveat, but I still expect Purdue to win the game based on where they are in the evolution of their team and how they match up because of that interior strength.
Yeah, it makes sense. I agree with you. Moving on to the last part of this, another matchup that I'm really looking forward to is Trace Jackson Davis versus Hunter Dickinson on Sunday. IU plays Michigan, and last year I looked it up. I think Trace had only 10 points. Hunter had 13 and 6 or something. But Trace didn't have one of his better games, and I'm kind of expecting him kind of coming out for blood. What do you expect in that matchup between those two?
Well, I think one thing that in that game, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he saw a lot of Race Thompson, if Hunter did, because Race is so physically powerful and it takes some of the defensive pressure off of Trace. Then you use Trace as a off the ball shot blocker. He's become a terrific shot blocker, more than doubled his blocks this season. So I think that it'll be interesting to see how often or how rarely they match against one another. especially on Hunter's offensive end. That would be something that I would look for. Trace has become a terrific defensive player, and so there may be times late in the game if it's tight and competitive, and Hunter's the obvious first option in that circumstance, especially on the inside, that they would move Trace over because of his defensive improvement. But I would think that it would start early on with trying to protect Trace from foul trouble. Hunter's such a physical offensive player, and plays through so many players. In terms of, when I say play through, I'm not talking about ball goes into him. I'm talking about he plays physically through his defenders. So putting Trace in that circumstance where it's hard, sometimes it's hard not to foul because of how sudden he is with his post moves, and how he, without fouling you, just gets into your body. So I think Race Thompson, who's a little bit shorter but really physical, I think he might get a little bit more of that matchup for a lot of the day.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's going to be must-watch TV for me on Sunday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Mike, I really appreciate you coming on. I wish you all the best of luck with your DVR. Hopefully that memory stays put and doesn't get filled up. I do not envy how much sports you have to watch, but I love your content, and best of luck with all that the rest of the season.
Stuart, it's been a real pleasure and an honor to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.